respect out of everybody's time, I'm going to go ahead and get things started. And thank you everyone that's on the call today. This is the SASI webinar number 7. We're going to go over procurement and capital projects. And this is more of a panel discussion. This is not going to be necessarily a formal presentation. So we really want everybody on the call to provide feedback and insight in their experiences through these processes. And my name is not Sarah Kirkpatrick, but it's Adam Krein, and I work with Sarah as part of the statewide school facility assessment, and part of that is the Supporting America's School Infrastructure Grant Program, which has allowed us to provide these types of trainings to school districts. So this is our agenda today. We're going to do an introduction to procurement and capital projects. We have a great panel on here from different organizations that have offered their time. Invitation to bids. We'll do a request for proposals and tips and tricks. All right, Mr. McKay.
Great. I'm David McKay, HMK Company. We're owners representative project manager, and representing public owners primarily in the state of Oregon for the last 30 years. Have a lot of experience around the state, and just love to share that with all of you. We are a company that has offices in Salem, Medford, and Redmond, and a small satellite office now in Portland. So we try to serve the local communities from the local communities.
And
Chris?
Master McKay, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Chris McKay, also with HMK. So David's in the Salem office. I'm over in Central Oregon in the Redmond office, but I think he did a great job of introducing himself. So, all right, introducing the company. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. And Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Once again, I want to say thank you to ODE for kind of facilitating these meetings. But my name is Scott Rogers. I'm with the Wenaha Group. As noted there, we're a Native American-owned owners rep construction management firm. I am based out of our Pendleton office, so kind of supporting Eastern Oregon, essentially I-84 corridor from Hood River to Ontario. And then Wallowa County to Grant County is kind of mine. But Wenaha, similar to HMK, we have a good statewide presence. But I'll just say that HMK and Wenaha, we very much support our public clients in K-12. So very passionate about supporting and doing good work for public agencies. So appreciate that. I appreciate my co-presenters and look forward to the discussion today. I will note, and again, as much as I try to protect my time, I unfortunately have an obligation at 1:30, so I'll have to step off here in just about 20 minutes. So I apologize for the conflict.
Thanks, Scott.
I just like to add that Wenaha is a great competitor and a great company who we have a lot of respect for. I think there's a lot of mutual respect between each other for the services we provide and the style, the way we do it.
Known each other for many years, right? We both were former ESD employees and see each other at a lot of events. And we've had the pleasure of presenting together in the past. And we'll again at the Bonds, Ballots, and Buildings event for anybody that will be at that here in just a couple weeks. So
yep. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So this is our agenda today. We have a few different topics we're going to go over. And again, this is kind of a panel discussion. So we'll have the different panel members here discussing each slide.
Yeah, I guess so. Adam, if it's all right.
Yeah.
Well, if it's okay, I know, and again, just recognizing that it's a small group and maybe we could keep this a little more casual, but I know we have Austin, Brandy Joe, and Joe with us today. So please feel free to interrupt, but I guess maybe real quick, I would love to get some insight into Austin, Brandy Joe, and Joe's where you are at, just kind of in the district and what your role is real quick, if that's okay. Brandy Joe? where, if you don't mind humoring me, where are you located at, and what is your role?
I'm Klamath Falls City Schools down in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I am, on paper, I am the maintenance secretary. In reality, I am everything the supervisor doesn't have time to take care of.
Okay, so you're doing a lot of procurements and coordination and getting folks on site.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, well, thank you for your work. Austin? Not seeing Austin come off mute. Joe, if you don't mind just humoring me. Oh, Austin there. Young Kala, okay. And maintenance grounds as well. So thank you for that. So I guess David and Chris, if I may, just kind of following that thought process. So kind of lost the presentation. There we go. Yeah, you're okay. Got to keep us on our toes. So I'll just say, and David and Chris, if I can, I'll just kind of stay in high level, so I know that both Wenaha and HMK facilitate a lot of procurements for our clients, both complex, RFPs for architectural services or construction manager, general contractor, down to, seeking quote requests for geotechnical services or other sort of professional services. So between the two firms, I think we have a lot of experience kind of speaking to that. So I guess in maybe initiating that, so when I approach a procurement, it's really I think twofold. One, obviously we have a need for the client, for the public entity, but also two, I think there's value in the public client, in the public entity really demonstrating some proficiency, right? You want to solicit good proposals. Part of it is getting a good document out on the street so that responding firms, everybody's pretty busy. And I'll just say, as somebody that supports and lives in rural Oregon, especially when you get out into rural parts of the state, which I know HMK and Wenaha both support a lot of rural clients. So to some extent, it's really about demonstrating proficiency. Oh, South Umpqua. Okay. Thank you, Joe. Or thank you, Adam. And so as a result of that, it's really about, I think, coming out and demonstrating the need, right? So how do we kind of put forth a really solid document that calls out the kind of who the owner is, the scope of work we're looking to have done, but in particular, how do I ensure competition? And so I typically have a good network of prior firms. I'll just use geotech or some other kind of specific needs there. There's a good pool of firms that I've worked with in the past. And so representing a public entity, I'll go through that process, pull together a really tight document, and then I will reach out to them ahead of time, provide it to them in alignment with the district's procurement requirements. And then I'm following up with any questions, comments. So I'm trying to maximize competition on that front. But maybe I'll look to David and Chris and see if that aligns with your thoughts on generally approaching issuance of quote requests or proposal documents.
Yeah, that's absolutely consistent with our process as well. And just thinking through sort of some of the red flags, when you outline a process, you have a clear scope of work, you've got your insurance requirements, your contract, you've done just a fantastic job. You can have a sort of a perfect RFP as far as hitting all the check marks of what you need to include. But sometimes there's still things that come up. Some challenges that you have to deal with, and Scott, I'm sure you've got a few. David, I know you've got a few sort of scenarios of what's currently occurring, and probably one that's been hitting us recently is qualified proposals. So we'll actually we've issued CMGC proposals or RFPs. We've also issued for architects, and recently, despite a solid question process, or we'll state that if there's any questions on the RFP, the contract, any component of this procurement process, you have to ask your questions in writing by this date. Otherwise, we're going to assume you have no questions. And we've recently had not only those timelines expire, but actual submission timeline. Firms will submit their proposals, and then buried in their proposal will be a qualification, and it will say something along the lines of, "We assume the usage of a contract," or we assume that we can negotiate the insurance requirements, and it causes a lot of and unfortunately you miss this in your initial review, and then unfortunately the school districts who score them, they don't really notice that, and then all of a sudden we get to the point where we're ready to issue a contract, or we're really reviewing it thoroughly, like, oh my gosh, like we can't accept this. And there's a major concern now where we violated procurement policy or statutes because they've essentially qualified their proposal and we can't select them. And now you've got to deal with potential protests. You've got to deal with the concern from who thinks they should be awarded because the district selected them, but they qualified, so they're now no longer selected. So, there's things that you need to look out for. And any time in a proposal where their cover letter or buried somewhere, they make a exception to what's outlined in the RFP process. I highly recommend that you either engage with a PM firm who's been through this or your legal counsel to determine if you can waive that as an informality. You can ask a clarifying question, or if you have to disqualify them altogether. And we're currently in a position where we're able to ask a clarifying question for one, but on the other hand, we have had to disqualify a firm that should have been selected had they not qualified the proposal. So it's one of the common red flags that we're seeing right now. I think it's just kind of where the industry's at and how contractors are approaching things, but it's absolutely something you need to be aware of.
We just, that's really become a big thing for us. I would say, know the limits in regards to proposals. For instance, Scott had started talking about geotechnical topo survey. If they're going to be at 100,000 and you have a relationship with a firm, you can direct appoint those. ORS allows you to direct appoint them. So, I think that's another thing that you need to be looking for is what do you estimate the cost of those services? And do you have to go through a formal process? Do you have to advertise? Do you have to get multiple quotes? By knowing those things can save you a lot of time. I think what Chris just shared too is a big one. In 30 years of doing hundreds and hundreds of these types of RFPs, now we're getting people trying to qualify their responses, which is not allowed by statute. So knowing these little things like this will help you in your process.
And if I may kind of piggyback in on both of your respective comments. Real quick, just circling back to that, what if I'm not getting enough proposals? I think part of that is ensuring that you've got enough time in the marketplace. If you issue a quote request or an RFP and you've only given a responder 1 to 2 weeks to respond, you're going to kind of by default limit competition. And I think more in alignment with what David and Chris are saying, somebody may take a risk on throwing their name in the hat, but they're going to qualify that, right? Like, man, these guys are asking for a fee or they're asking for a cost for this. It's a really quick burn. I'm going to throw a number in, but I'm going to put some sideboards on it to protect me as the proposer or the bidder. And I think, again, the intention of approaching this from a procurement standpoint is to really try to put as much leverage in the public entities side of the house to kind of negotiate that. And again, we're not trying to sort of negatively, I guess, put the thumb on the scale for the public entity, but just ensuring that there's fair competition and the public entity is well represented and protected in its procurements. So.
All right. So how do I resolve timeline issues? What if the proposal that I had incorrect timeline?
Well, I think first, I think first you need to be thinking through the timeline, and our recommendation is 21 days. Is that tends to be enough time.
Yeah.
And the other thing I recommend is really map out your timeline from when you issue even when you're going to begin to prepare your RFP to the date you're going to issue the RFP, to the date it's going to be due, to when you're going to score, to when you're going to notify, and then think about when you need that service done. Let's just kind of piggyback on Scott's on geotechnical services. So that's a engineer that's going to come in and do some borings to determine the soil conditions. You'd have to do that for a seismic project. Many of you probably are doing seismic projects. You need to give them at least 6 weeks to be able to get that boring, roughly testing done and a report to your structural engineer, you need to think about when is your structural engineer going to need it. And so then kind of work backwards then to fill in all those dates, making sure that you give about 21 days. You can do it sooner, but 21 days seems to be a sweet spot for that timeline. And that's the way we approach it. It's looking at the 30,000 foot level, trying to get those bookends that we need to have from when are we going to start putting it together to when do I need whatever the deliverable is and how that fits into the overall project. And then we work back to try to get all the dates in. And then the other thing we like to do is we like to put all those dates in so that the proposers know. I'll tell you, just as a person that proposes all the time, there's nothing more frustrating than not knowing when they're going to score, not knowing when they're going to award. And when you have a district that you propose to that basically runs on that timeline, it just is very encouraging for us because you're sitting waiting. You put a lot of time into these proposals. You're sitting waiting. It's, you're trying to fill your book of business, and it's just very helpful. A little long-winded there. Sorry, guys.
You're fine.
That's fine. I completely agree with everything you just said. I'm going to take a slightly different approach on this, and that is, so that's for the procurement process. Completely agree. Now, if you're putting your timelines in your RFP for the actual services that are to be completed, so let's take architectural for instance. Let's say that you're planning on this having a 6-month design window and maybe a 14-month construction window. And so you've gone through fee negotiations, you've selected your architect, and then you find out that this is really going to require 10 months of design and 18 months of construction. That changes things, but I think that something that's very important is when you go through fee negotiations or when you ask for price, that when appropriate, you ask for a unit cost. That way you can help scale and limit the exposure that you have. Whenever we ask for a CMGC proposal, we always ask for general conditions as part of it. We don't score them, but we ask for them. And the reason why is because we want to have that as a starting point for conversation when we get into the procurement process of that project. So in the CMGC, you hire your partner, your general contractor. You still go out to bid, but that's really throughout the design, at the end of design phase, which could be months or a year later. So when you get there, you might determine, oh, this is actually more complex than we originally thought. And this happens all the time. So this isn't a rare instance. This happens all the time. But now we have a starting point where we can start to say, okay, well, our general conditions are going to be about $60,000 a month. This is now 16 months instead of the 10 we originally thought. So we have a starting place for negotiation, and we can minimize that risk moving forward. So, that's something that happens quite often. And again, it's just putting that thought into how can I limit my risk exposure by defining cost and what that might look like going forward. Scott, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, well said by both of you. Kind of continuing to stay in that vein, I guess, Brandy Joe, Austin Joe, I don't know what procurements you're more involved with or concerned about, but I think just, again, if your timeline was wrong in your proposal, if you, for instance, like you've issued your quote request or your proposal, your request for proposals, and it's still out on the street and you get sort of the heads up that, oh man, my schedule's off, you can issue it and as an addenda, and that may help kind of clarify, again, for bidders or proposers. So if you're intending to clarify your schedule of work while you still have your quote request or procurement documents out on the street, you can just clarify that for proposers. And then as Chris or David noted, if you get responses back and you've got to adjust that, the general conditions of the GCs, those are the costs for the contractor to actually do the work, right? So their costs to run the job trailer, superintendent on site, tools, equipment. So to some extent, yep. So $10,000 or less, Brandy Joe. So, you're handling a lot of, I need to get a roofer on site. I got to get a mechanical contractor to come and serve this piece of mechanical equipment. So to a great extent, providing clarity, like I am doing X, I need it done during these days. I'm looking for a service agreement to service all of my rooftop units. Here are the types of units that I have, etc. So, they need to be serviced X amount, once per quarter. They include the following mean? So I think just being clear with what type of equipment you have, what sort of the need is, when you expect the work to be done, it needs to be done outside of school hours or on nights and weekends, that's going to impact a proposer's response to you. So just being as clear as you are with what your schedule is. The question about what if the permits are delayed, and I'll back up and maybe I think following the same thought process that Chris or David has, if we're looking at big work, where we know the permits and it's a full plan review, the first thing your owner's rep's going to do is go talk to your quote authority having jurisdiction, your AHJ. They're going to go talk to your local planning department, be that the city, the county, the state, and they're going to reach out and engage. Hey, what's your plan review process look like? How long are you looking? Is it 4 weeks to 6 weeks? And as a result of that, that could have a pretty significant impact to your schedule. But again, if you're doing mostly smaller procurements, you noted $10,000 or less. I know there's a slide here a little bit that allows you to sort of direct a point, and especially being in more rural areas, you have greater sort of, again, what is the ability for a contractor, I'll just stay parked on mechanical contractor to do recurring service agreements for you, they must be able to respond within 2 hours or something to that effect, right? If you got a no heat situation in January, you've got to have some criteria in there. So I think you can be very clear with defining your parameters to best meet your procurement needs there. And Adam, I do apologize. I will need to step off here in just a moment. So, okay. I apologize. Yes, you can ask for.
You're good. Yeah, if we can get maybe one more. Let's see. We got a couple bully slides here, and so we'll. So yeah, what about prevailing wage and payroll? So which projects are under bully and Davis, bacon, eggs, and pancakes?
Yeah, eggs and pancakes. You got my attention on that one, Adam. But I think the biggest one is Bureau of Labor and Industries. So there's, the first question I would ask is, where is your funding source? Is that going to be, basically, is it federal dollars? If it's federal, it's going to be subject then to Davis-Bacon wages. If it's state of Oregon public monies, then you're going to be subject to Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. So that's the first kind of line in the sand. What's your funding source? And as a result of that, where does it sort of fall in that sense? And then if I may real quick, and then I'll step off to Brandy Joe's, I can ask for that kind of response. Yes, I think the better you are in terms of sort of putting some parameters, I want you to respond, and I'll use the mechanical support. Please note that your service would be required during this time outside of school hours or nights and weekends. And that again will result, maybe they don't want to respond because that contractor wants to be home in the evenings or they're out of town on the weekends. So I think just ensuring that you've got clarity in your quote request documents so that they know what they're responding to. And again, I apologize for the conflict, but I want to say thank you to the attendees and thank you to my colleagues. And I will see a few of you here in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thanks,
Sorry
Scott.
for the conflict.
Chris or David, did you guys want to elaborate on any more on the?
I do. I just what Scott said is true and accurate. Here's what I recommend. Many of you remember the ESSER dollars that were administered through the Department of Education during COVID. Initially, everybody thought those would follow BOLI, the Oregon prevailing wage rates. Partway through the program, Department of Education informed everybody that these needed to follow Davis-Bacon. Another one that you may come across is FEMA disaster money. Sometimes that FEMA disaster money being administered through the Oregon Emergency Management Department is then considered BOLI, but it's possible that the feds would say, no, we want you to follow Davis-Bacon. So it's very important to ask whoever the administrator of the funds are. So the ESSER monies was Department of Education, is to ask them specifically, are these going to fall under Davis-Bacon? Because there's a whole nother set of requirements for administering Davis-Bacon as an owner. Or are they going to fall under the Bureau of Labor and Industry, Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industry? Because those are the ones that we're all familiar with. And this is for projects over $50,000 or parts of a project that would be over $50,000. That's the clarification I'll just add there for you.
One more clarification on that is, or if a project is a demolition project and you have no intent in replacing whatever was there. So if you have a $500,000 demolition project, it's not subject to prevailing wage unless you intend to rebuild on that site within the next few years. And just so what do you do with that? You have to have the Oregon certified payroll on file. You must have it on file. You don't have to do anything with it. Davis-Bacon is much more robust. You need to have it on file. You need to review it for consistency. And then you also have to have an interview process to confirm with the workers on site that they are being paid the wages that is stated.
Right. We do have some resources here on this next slide, and this slide deck will be available on our website in the next few weeks. So, or you can just jot that down and use Susan as a bully resource.
She's fantastic, very approachable. So don't hesitate to reach out to her.
Awesome. All right, how do I resolve contractor issues, Chris?
Oh, so that's a $1 million question. So you're going to have challenges with contractors, and they inevitably come up, and usually there's a disagreement on the scope of work, schedule, or the contract. And I think the first thing that you always need to do is you need to go back to the documentation. And this is what we tell all of our project managers and everyone we work with is, what did they bid? So go back to your specifications, your drawings if you're part of a larger project, or whatever procurement document that was issued. And you need to refer back to that one as the basis of everything. So I should look at this first question. So what if the contractor's delaying signing a contract? Well, then you need to, so assuming a CMGC or an ITB, then you may need to understand why. If they're not really giving you an answer, they're just delaying the whole process, then I think you need to threaten to pull the contract and go with the next low bid or the next proposer. I've actually seen this as a tactic by firms, either because they want a project to be delayed to the following year or construction window, or because they're trying to essentially put you against a wall to agree to things, and both are sort of not tolerable or acceptable to me. So I think you just need to aggressively get it resolved. Call them, email them, and then put a deadline on what happens if they do not sign it by a certain date. Part of the procurement process, and this is statute, is you need to include your contract as part of the procurement. So there really should be no questions that they have of the contract, and there should be nothing that prevents them from signing it. In that by proposing or submitting a bid, they're accepting that language. Again, in previous presentations, that RFP process or ITB process has a window for them to ask questions and to negotiate that contract. If that time elapses, then there's no more opportunity for that. And as I mentioned earlier in this call, in negotiating after the fact opens yourself up to a protest. So again, put a timeline on it. Tell them what happens if they don't sign by that date, and then don't be afraid to go on to the next one, the next bidder or proposer.
And I just would share this for any of you. We have some standard language we use. If you don't have standard language, like on bid forms and things like that, just reach out to us. Don't feel like you've got to make something up. We just love to be able to help you, and no commitment on your part to us. If we have a resource we can share, and I know Scott's the same way, we want to share it with you.
David, do you want to talk more about what you would do if a contractor does not honor a bid?
Well, so we've got a couple choices. Number one, let me just give you a real example. We had a roofing project. The roofer decided they wanted to use a different product than was specified. They didn't go through a substitution request process. They placed their bid. We began to work through, we awarded the contract. We hadn't signed, the contract wasn't signed, but began to work through just making sure that everybody was on the same page. We found out they weren't, and they were wanting to do something different. And we were forced to basically declare them non-responsive and award to the next highest. The problem is the next highest bidder was about $100,000 more on a $700,000 project. So quite a bit of difference. And the district decided to make a bid bond claim against the contractor. So there's a bid bond. This is what I have to say is that the bid bonds are a litigious process. You've got to hire an attorney, you've got to file litigation, and frankly, nobody ever wins. So, you know, and the school district ended up having to spend about $100,000 on legal fees to then find out that the bonding company wasn't going to pay. So you do have a bid bond. You can use that to try to get a remedy from the low contractor to the next highest contractor. It is going to be a litigation. They are going to fight. Where it has worked for me, I've only had 2 of these in my career. I had one and it was a really good contractor and he made a mistake and he realized he made a mistake. So I was able to, and he did not want me to file a bid bond claim because his bid credit rating was more important to him. His bonding credit rating was more important to him. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what, I don't want to write you a check for the difference, but what I will do is I'll make a donation to the district's foundation. Seemed to be a good approach. Superintendent accepted it. The foundation got a check, and this one was about $6,500. We let him go. We awarded the next highest contractor. We move forward. So sometimes you want to find another path of less pain, but you do have a bid bond. My caution to you is it is going to be a litigation to get any remedy from that bid bond. I hope that made sense. Any questions on that? That could be a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll just provide a little bit of clarification here. So
Thank you.
Part of submitting a bid on a public project, if the contract value is $100,000 or the bid value is $100,000 or more, you must provide a bid bond that's 10% of that value. In lieu of a bid bond, you can also provide a cashier's check. So, and what that bond is for, that 10% of your bid value, is to show commitment, and it's required to ensure that you will enter into a contract. I mean, you can't just throw bids out. Say you have a bid day. On one day, you've got 3 projects you're bidding. You only have the capacity to do one of them, and you throw out bids on all 3. You happen to get 2, and you're like, well, I don't really want this one. I want this one more. A bid bond prevents you from doing that. You're basically obligated to complete that work. So what Dave was talking about was that 10%. A contractor missed something in their bid. They're significantly lower than the next lowest bidder, and they realized, you know, hey, we missed something, we can't honor our bid, and that's what he's talking about with being released by submitting a donation to the foundation. So this happens. It's pretty rare, 2 or 3 times in the last 13 years that I can remember, but it does happen. It's something to be aware of. And I'd probably say the biggest thing to be aware of is if you do have a project over 100,000, that the bidders have to submit a bid bond with their bid. And if they do not, they're declared non-responsive. So that's something you can look back on the previous presentations and get a little bit more of that checklist to see what's required. That's something to be aware of. On this next one for retention bonds and subcontractors. So there's 2 aspects of this. I'm going to talk about one of them, and that's payment performance bond. So again, projects that are over, I believe it's $100,000 are required to have a payment performance bond. And what that's for is it's to protect the subcontractors if there's a dispute between them and the GC and they're not getting paid, they can pull a claim on the payment bond. And it's very important as a public owner that you're aware of this, because what's going to happen is somebody's going to call you and they're going to ask for a copy of that payment bond. Your only obligation is to provide that payment bond. You do not need to open the books or open pay applications or discuss, interview for them to get more information. And I would highly recommend that you limit it just to your requirement, which is respond by providing them with the payment bond. If you do more, then I would talk to legal counsel and just ask them for recommendations. So that's the payment bond. For retention bonds in Oregon, there's a 5% retention on projects until completion of said project. So if you have a $100,000 project, 5% being $5,000 is held. So in proportion for progress payments, if they've completed $10,000 worth of work, there's $500 that's retained, and that's shown on the pay application form. Something that has happened in this pretty much changes every year, unfortunately, with our legislators. But there's a House bill, I believe it's 2005, if I'm not mistaken, and I can provide in the comments afterwards or sent to Adam or Sarah. But they've changed the way that retention retention is held. So it used to be that school districts could put retention into a account, and then they changed it to an interest-bearing account, and then later they changed it into a mutually held escrow account that's interest-bearing, so both parties have access to it. And that's still the case, but then they've added this new layer, which is that you can actually pull a bond out, and then you release that retention. So when you have a little bit of a larger project, say you've got a $1 million+ contract with multiple subcontractors, it used to be very easy where you could just say, okay, it's 5% of that total that's being retained. Well, now you might have a painting contractor who's $75,000 of that $1 million, and I'm going to regret using a weird number. Why don't we say 50,000? It's like you do the math. So let's say 50,000 for painting, and that painter says, I'm going to have a bond for my retention. Well, now they're owed that retention with their progress payments. Before you withheld it, now you have to pay them. So it's not a straight 5% anymore. Now it's the full value of the contract retained minus 5% of $50,000, which, if my math is right, is about $2,500. Nobody check on that, please. But so now it's you say your progress payment on a $1 million contract is $200,000. So you'd want to release $10,000, but you have to release minus the painter's amount because you've released that. So it's a new sort of thing to work through, and hopefully your general contractor is helping you. And what I would say is, don't try to figure this out yourself. What I would recommend is that your pay application from your general contractor, they would show that, and then they would have a little tally with the math that shows all of the subcontractors that have a retention bond, and they pull that out so that it's very easy to understand. All of our contracts, and again, as Dave mentioned earlier, if you ever need assistance, you want a document, with no cost, we'll send it to you. We want to help out school districts. We'll send it to you, and in that contract language, it says that the owner can ask for clarifications on invoices in order to understand and provide payment. So that is a contractual obligation that general contractors have, is to provide you this information. So again, I would ask them to spell it out very clearly to make sure that it's easily understood and that you can release the right amount of payment. David, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Oh, it's all good.
This particular thing is something that is ever changing. Again, I mentioned every session, it seems like there's a new piece of legislation that tweaks this a little bit. I'm sorry, let's see. So are we required to provide project information to outside groups? So this is a really good question. We get peppered with questions from plan centers. Plan centers, when you go out to bid, you've got you say you advertise on the DJC, which is publication of statewide distribution, which you're required to do on projects over $100,000. You'll have all these plan centers. You'll get plan centers from Georgia that for some reason are interested in having the documents and being a plan center for your $150,000 project out in rural Jackson County or another rural county and Jefferson County, and it makes zero sense because I don't know what value somebody from Georgia is going to provide. So what I always do is I point them to where they can get this information. So, we host all this on our website, and they try to get you to do their job for them. We just point them to the website, and you almost train these individuals to do so. So those are the plan centers. There's also outside groups that will ask for the information as a public records request. And there is an obligation to provide them with that information. Now, there's aspects that might be considered trade secret, and it's the responsible party. So like a CMGC, they typically put something that's trade secret, and you need to redact that information, but it's up to them to clearly state that it's a trade secret for you to redact. Quite honestly, I don't know that I've really seen this often. It's primarily CMGCs will do that. And I don't know if that would qualify as a trade secret, but it's usually not material. But yes, you are required as public records requests to provide that information. The way that we handle this is, and unions are another good example, they'll ask for information as well, is we segregate the information. We ask them to clearly state what they're asking for. Sometimes people go on like a fishing expedition where they're going to start looking for things that could potentially be a problem. So we ask them, please clarify exactly what you're looking for, what time frame, etc. And if there's a cost associated with that, tell them that the cost is associated with such. And then you can either have them come to your office and pick it up, or you can send them a digital copy. I forget what the timeline is. Is it 30 days, David, that you have to respond to these requests? I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's typically prevailing wage rates sheets. The certified payroll is typically what we get from unions.
That's right. But I always respond to it. You are obligated to, but just be very specific, or ask them to be very specific in what they're looking for. Don't just send them everything. That's my recommendation there. Usually it is unions that are asking these questions, or plan centers.
Right. And I just say this, the most annoying ones to me are the plan centers. And I don't respond to them. They make it sound like it's your responsibility to give them the information, but really what they're trying to do is get you to do their work so they can sell what you've given them to their members. And I've got better things to do with my time. I don't want to be billing my clients for doing those types of things. So you can disregard those types of things.
Joe, did that answer your question?
Find my buttons here. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And it is the plan centers that are driving me crazy. So thank you.
I'm sure they are. It's always the ones from Georgia or the East Coast. They just they get me annoyed. So
Any other questions?
Is there any slide that we didn't quite cover that you'd like us to spend a little bit more time on?
Or just even just questions you have. What's the biggest pain points you have for your too is another one. What's the biggest pain points you have for RFPs, whether for design services or other professional services, or for bid documents to contractors? We're here to answer your questions and be a resource for you. Take advantage of my no hair. Used to have a lot of hair, but I've lost it all dealing with contractors and architects through the years.
Yeah. Chris rubbing it in there. Yeah, guys, share these information with your partners and other neighboring school districts, and I know you guys talk with them. Are a great resource, as well as Scott and his team. But yeah, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out, or we put them in the chat, and we can have these guys answer them. Otherwise, we will wrap up here. Just got a couple more slides. So I will, or Sarah will email out a link to this PowerPoint, and as I said earlier, there will be a recording of this online, so you can share with staff if they would like to watch this and get this information. I do have a quick poll before everybody leaves. Let me launch that. And then there will be, bear with me, Sarah wanted me to share one more thing. The next webinar will be in March with the Oregon OSA. So OSHA will have a presentation in March for this group as well. and we'll be sending out more communication regarding that in the future. There should be a poll out there now for the attendees. If you could please answer that question. It's just one question, should be real quick. And there's also contact information for David, Chris, and Scott.
I just would say this, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to help you. You know, Joe, I think you're at South Umpqua. You can ask Erica. I've worked with Erica. Chris and I both worked with Erica, but you know, any of you, just give us a call, send us an email. Don't feel like you're going to get a bill from us. You're not. We want to just help you. You guys got a big job. I think it was Brandy Joe who talked about everything that what her job is, but everything that she ends up doing. Brandy Joe, if you got a question, you need help, call us. We're here for you. I see you're still in the I don't know what I don't know phase. Give us a call and maybe we can help you begin to understand the question you're wanting to ask, Brandy Joe.
I'll just throw this out there too. Today, the application period for Department of Education's TAP grant, Technical Assistance Program, opened up. So if you can, you go to the website and navigate to that, and you can fill out that application. That puts you in running for just an excellent resource for facility assessments, as well as other assessments. I think it closes on February 13th. So a little bit of a plug for the Department of Education. I just think this is a great program. It just opened up today. If you need any assistance, again, don't hesitate to reach out, but spend a few minutes looking at it. It's just a great resource for districts.
I think it's a one-page application, and you know we fill these out all the time for districts. So if you want to get one filled out, you're not quite sure what to do. I know that Leanna is a great resource, but we're here too. We'll be glad to help you. Again, anything we can do to help.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate your time.
You bet.